Just like so many of these medical screenings, government statistics, and the liars who make them induce very similar harms on our economy and our society as a whole. Doing the wrong thing is worse than doing nothing. Hey there, friends, fans, and foes of Dad Saves America. John Copperweight here, and I thought I would take this Friday to talk about lies. Lies, damned lies, and statistics, where they come from, where they go wrong, and what we as a country and as individuals should do about it. Because there is a lot of politics going on in the world of our macro data.
The Bureau of Labor Statistics collects data on a number of key economic concerns and produces critical reports on prices, inflation, and unemployment. The data is then used by businesses, investors, and government organizations like the U.S. Federal Reserve to make critical decisions. But Friday, President Donald Trump abruptly fired the commissioner of the BLS, Dr. Erica McIntyre, accusing her of rigging the latest jobs report for political purposes. Former BLS Commissioner William Beach, nominated by Trump in his first term, says that's impossible.
The commissioner doesn't do anything to collect the numbers. What I think really upset the president on Friday were the revisions to May and June.
It is interesting that we have these agencies that have people that run them that are appointed by our highest political officer, namely the President of the United States, and yet they claim that they have no role to play in the agencies they run. I'm going to come back to this, but that is a little awkward, I think.
The BLS's initial monthly jobs estimates are often based on incomplete data, so they are revised twice after the initial report, followed by a preliminary annual revision in August and a final revision in February.
BLS is the finest statistical agency in the entire world. Its numbers are trusted all over the world.
The BLS collects jobs data in two separate surveys. The first is done in part with old-fashioned door knocking. A second survey is collected from thousands of businesses and government agencies via telephone, internet surveys, and for large corporations through an automated data transfer.
BLS is responsible for a number of things. It was, as an agency, originally founded in 1884. So this is not a new enterprise, but it got rolled into the newly created Department of Labor in 1913 by, frankly, the worst, maybe the worst president in the history of the United States, Woodrow Wilson, the Claudine Gay of the early 1900s. He was the former president of Princeton University, who goes on to become the warmongering eugenicist that resegregated the federal government, created the income tax, the Federal Reserve, and among his many crimes against the country, the Bureau of Labor, which then absorbed the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And so this creation, which began to try to understand what was happening during the industrialization of America with jobs and labor and incomes, quickly turned into a tool of the progressive era to manage the economy, to manage the society. There is this management slogan, which is that you can't manage what you don't measure. And the measurement of what these people, our betters, might manage is the starting point. And this is something that I really want to focus on today, because I think we sort of assume that the government should do all this stuff and that it's benign, that it can be apolitical. But it is fundamentally a tool for management of the society. So for starters, the BLS, as this report already noted, makes mistakes. It's combination of surveys, which are going to be highly flawed and subject to statistical manipulation just to try to arrive at something that's supposed to be representative of the whole country. They make mistakes, they get errors, they get things wrong. And in recent years, they've gotten them very, very wrong. Late last year, as many remember, the BLS actually revised the job creation numbers down during the Biden administration very, very substantially, by over 800,000. And one could say, hey, that's good. They're being honest. They're keeping themselves honest. But when you have an agency that's charged with keeping itself honest, it's an open question how honest it can remain. And so, of course, with President Trump stepping in to exercise his authority, there's plenty of criticism about what comes next.
President Trump has announced his pick to replace the former head of the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics after he fired the previous commissioner earlier this month in response to weaker than expected jobs report. His nominee is named E.J. Antoni. Announcing his nomination on Truth Social, Trump wrote, quote, E.J. will ensure that the numbers released are honest and accurate.
I've actually met EJ because I know a lot of these free market and right of center economists because I'm a nerd, but I don't know him well, so I can't really speak to him as a person or whether he's good or bad. All I really know is he's the new count. He is the new. This is a Nolan creation. He is the new count of our government.
I am the Count.
Hi, Count.
Do you know why they call me the Count? Because I love to count things.
I know.
That's him. That's our man.
President Trump's pick to oversee the Bureau of Labor Statistics is already rattling cages in and out of Washington. E.J. Antoni's nomination already had critics concerned the administration might manipulate critical economic data to fit the president's agenda. And now he's talking about getting rid of the Bureau's flagship report altogether.
So this last point's really interesting that EJ actually was floating the idea of reducing the amount of data that the BLS reports, specifically the monthly jobs data. And as I understand it, he's kind of waffled on that. But he might actually have a point. And while the president is claiming that this is going to make the numbers more accurate, I think those of us that are honest should be critical of any president's desire to manipulate the numbers. Every president wants to manipulate the numbers. We constantly hear about how China is cooking its books to make its GDP look better than it is. And yet we somehow think that our government doesn't do the same thing. Well, it does. In fact, going back to 1994, the BLS changed the way inflation was measured in ways that may have fundamentally changed a lot of the economic policy that came next. And whether that was good or bad is not clear, but it is clear that they're manipulating this stuff all the time. They have to. And since they have a monopoly, being the government, of being the issuer of the most prestigious, most official numbers, people tend to go along with it. And that is the problem. There is, in fact, several aspects of the way, especially unemployment numbers are measured, that are already, I think, somewhat understood to be a problem. Namely the fact that we have this notion of being disconnected from the labor force and therefore not included in our unemployment numbers. This is already a very deep manipulation of what's going on and how we should understand how many people are out of work in America. I've talked about this quite a bit, that there's this entire, mostly male, underemployed, discouraged part of our society. Close to 7 million men are not looking for work. They are of work age. They are not on Social Security disability, and they're not looking for work. There's even more who are on Social Security disability when they are in fact capable of working, and their lives would be better if they actually got a job. We are happier and healthier when we have some kind of role in serving other people. That's what a job is, and it's why work is one of the big determinants of human happiness and satisfaction. Men without work get depressed, end up on substances, and see their lives spiral downward. This is something that former guest Mike Rowe has talked about quite a bit, but plenty of people have. And it's just another example of how we'll hear things about how strong the economy is and how low unemployment is. But the books have been cooked in this way. The choice to subtract people from the denominator is a cooking of the books. It's a cooking of the books. It's a way to make numbers look better than they actually are and to ignore people in the society when it comes to macroeconomic policy. But the bigger question, the one not enough people are talking about, in fact, almost nobody is talking about, is that we might be better off if we just stopped doing this altogether. If we disbanded this macroeconomic puppetry that our bettors claim they are going to do and claim that they need BLS data to perform. In fact, we have a really interesting case study, and that is the case study of Sir John Copperweight. He was the finance minister in charge of managing the economic policy of Hong Kong when it was controlled by the British.
In the 1960s, he was the top economic official for Hong Kong when it was a British territory. His free market approach transformed the city from one of the poorest places in the world to one of the richest. When Copperweight arrived in Hong Kong after World War II, it was a sorry place with no natural resources and little trade.
Peasants.
The British had all but written off the territory as a barren island with no future. But Copperweight saw things differently. British policymakers in the 1940s believed that government was needed to boost an economy. Copperweight thought this was hogwash.
He probably did literally think it was hogwash at that point.
How can heavy taxes and regulations that limit commerce make society richer? When he became Hong Kong's financial secretary in 1961, he put his free market ideas to work. He reduced barriers to trade, scaled back bureaucratic rules, and drastically limited the growth of government. During his tenure as Hong Kong's financial secretary, real wages rose by 50%. The percent of the population in dire poverty fell dramatically. Yet the size of Hong Kong's government was less than 5% of the economy.
What Mr. Copperweight was doing was essentially maintaining the conditions that built the modern world, because macroeconomic management is pretty new. The United States got to be wealthy and industrialized before the age of macroeconomic management. We were already a modern industrialized society before GDP was being measured. And that's one of the things that just gets forgotten in our modern times, that we don't need to measure everything, that actually the decisions most of us are making aren't contingent on these large aggregate sets of data that really end up not telling us much about anything. In fact, they end up just being a tool for people that want to mess with us. And that's exactly what Copperweight thought. I found this interesting. The Guardian is a left of center paper, but it had this obituary for Mr. Copperweight. And part of this is just kind of interesting. It's just a way of thinking about kind of what got accomplished under his do-nothing, laissez-faire governance. It writes, the colony's lack of natural resources apart from a harbor and the fact that it was a food importer made its success all the more interesting. Copperweight's policies attracted the attention of economists like Milton Friedman, whose 1980s television series Milk Free to Choose featured Hong Kong's economic progress in some detail. Now, Hong Kong, since 2000, and in the past really 25 years, has backslid because the Chinese communists have reasserted control and begun to put a lot more top-down stuff, including restrictions on civil liberties and martial law. And it is not a free market utopia as I sit here today. It is a country that's actually, or should I say, it is a city-state that's in distress. But it is a perfect social experiment in letting people live their lives without measuring ways to mess with them. And that is exactly what he thought. At one point, some articles about him note that, asked what the key thing poor countries should do. Copperweight once remarked, they should abolish the Office of National Statistics. He refused to collect all but the most superficial statistics, believing they led the state to fiddle about remedying perceived ills, thus hindering the working of the market. And this might be apocryphal, but I have read somewhere in my nerdery way back when that he was once asked, why don't you measure unemployment on the island? And he responded saying, if I measure it, someone will want me to do something about it, and that will only make matters worse.
He is suffering from politicians' logic.
Something must be done. This is something, therefore we must do it.
But doing the wrong thing is worse than doing nothing.
Politicians' logic. Something must be done. This is something, therefore we must do it. They all are subject to this. Left, right, center, progressive, conservative, you name it. If you're in a position of power and there's some number being touted as a problem, you will be pressured to do something about it. Now, while Mr. Copperthwaite was leaving the people of Hong Kong alone, just across the water, the very same people, the very same fundamental cultural background were experiencing, Mamdani 1.0. You want to talk about treating people like numbers? Nowhere is that more prevalent than in communist societies. You might be thinking, this sounds like far out nonsense. Of course, we need to have measures of things. Of course, we need to have ways of understanding trajectories and trends and where things are going. And you are right. The question isn't, should there be measurements? The question is, who should do them? Who should we trust? And which measures actually mean anything? We have another great case study of this problem with our recent election predictions. As we know, the classical polls, which were long relied upon with sort of similar survey-based mechanisms, turned out to not do a very good job of predicting the outcome compared with the actual prediction markets. And this is from an article about it, noting that for free market purists, kind of like myself, the success of betting sites like Polymarket, Kalshi, and Predictit isn't surprising at all. The basic theory behind prediction markets is that a lot of people with money on the line can better predict an outcome than any one expert. This is true. This is a combination of two factors. One is the wisdom of crowds, that a decentralized group, larger the better, of people that have knowledge that's particular to time and place, they know what's really going on at the ground level where they are, that knowledge will be more accurate than some small group of experts. This is what used to be, and still for the non-political pages on Wikipedia, be the reason why Wikipedia was as reliable as the Encyclopedia Britannica. That's actually no longer true on the pages that are controversial because they become hotbeds of political nonsense and sort of manipulation by larger forces. But by and large, the wisdom of crowds tends to work. It tends to beat the centralized elite. And the other thing that's important to know is that basically all of the people that privately need to rely on macroeconomic data produce it. They produce it in a whole range of ways from a whole range of currently existing institutions. And I've got some notes because I want to just point out a couple of specific examples. ADP, which is one of the major payroll processing companies in the country, together with several others, produces a national employment report. So they're actually seeing in real time the payrolls getting processed from a large portion of American workers and companies. That's real-time data. And of course, companies care about that. So that report gets produced. There are competitors to ADP's reports. There's Challenger, Gray, and the Christmas job cut report. There's all sorts of stuff out there. LinkedIn produces jobs reports, and they actually have a massive pool of people who are seeking jobs. Frankly, I would trust LinkedIn's macro data before I'd trust surveys conducted by a government agency. But here's the thing. When you don't have a single source that's claiming to be true, that doesn't face market competition in quite the same way, you don't have to trust it. You can compare it. And that's what all of us do. That's what all companies do. All companies rely on a mix of different data sources. For prices and inflation, we not only have the Billion Prices Project, which is a private, more accurate version of trying to calculate what's actually happening with inflation for real, but we've got other types of measures, the Case-Shiller Index for home prices, the CoreLogic Home Price Index. Zillow and Redfin produce their own indexes about the housing market, and they are massive marketplaces. The long story short is that it is not as radical as it sounds to imagine decommissioning these centralized, politicized statistics agencies. And I think we would largely be better off for it. Now, you might be thinking, if you're wonky enough, well, what about the Fed? Doesn't the Fed rely on inflation data to determine how it's handling monetary policy and whether it should lower or raise interest rates? And the answer is yes, but the best proposal for reforming the Fed that I have ever seen is to basically turn it into a kind of prediction market, a prediction for the stability of nominal income, which, again, one of these days I'll go into in a lot of depth, but basically using the poly market type of betting for whether or not the future rate of inflation is going to be X or Y. And economist Scott Sumner, who's a friend of mine, has laid this stuff out in a lot of detail. And it would be a way to essentially end the Fed by turning it into a open market for all of us to place our bets on the future of the economy. That would be an improvement. And it would also depoliticize a really important piece of our civilization, which is our money. But even then, even when we've achieved perfect, private, competitive, decentralized measurement and reporting on macroeconomic data, there's still this more fundamental problem. And this is a fundamental problem that I think is best understood by way of analogy. And that is that the economy is much more like an organic system than an engineering problem to solve. Since the 1940s, since the dawn of Keynesianism, we have been told that the economy works like a car, that you can jumpstart it with stimulus, that it's being driven, that things drive the economy. That's not true. In fact, the economists that actually originally came up with GDP so much believed that the whole economy, which is to say the decisions of everyone in the society as it pertains to work and purchases, he so believed that it was hydraulic that he tried to simulate the entire economy using hydraulic pumps and a pressure system. He thought it could be literally like an engine. This was the architect of GDP. That's not how things work. People don't work that way. And we don't even work that way inside our own individual bodies. You see, when it comes to complex systems, some of the lessons we learn about our bodies apply more broadly. And in this case, I'm talking about how much we measure our health. You see, it turns out we live in this age where I got this Apple Watch on, it's doing all kinds of biometric readings. People get the Aura Ring. People do all kinds of crazy stuff. Brian Johnson has just made himself into a Netflix celebrity and a YouTube sensation by experimenting with how narrowly and refined he can measure the outcomes of taking this pill or that, or, trying this diet regime or that. A lot of that is well within the range of signal to noise. It is nothing but noise. And sometimes that noise and that measurement can send you off track. This is the problem of medical reversion. So what am I talking about here? Well, one of the new members of the Trump administration I happen to really like is an oncologist and epidemiologist whose YouTube channel really was an important source of actual information during the pandemic. His name is Vinay Prasad. And Vinay has worked on the fact that we mismeasure and induce unnecessary injury by measuring things that we don't understand with our bodies all the time. This is a serious problem in America because we overconsume health services. We overdiagnose all sorts of problems. With our kids, we overdiagnose ADHD and lead to overmedication and excessive intervention. The analogy to the economy is perfect because when you measure things that give you a signal that might be wrong, it induces you to take actions that might make things worse.
There's a nice paper in New England Journal from Gil Welch where South Korea, maybe 10, 15 years ago, they implemented a routine ultrasounding of thyroid gland protocol. And you watch year after year, the number of thyroid cancers they're finding has gone up like 7 times. We're finding 7 times as many cancers, but dying of thyroid cancer is absolutely flatline year after year. We're not reduced it 1 iota.
Think about what that means. That means that measurement went up. Oh, we're finding more signs of thyroid cancer. And yet all of the medical interventions, all of the painful surgeries and treatments produced no change in the rate of death from thyroid cancer. That means all of the additional intervention into human bodies because of the measurement produced no good outcomes in terms of people living longer.
So how are you finding 7 times more cancer, but you're not saving any lives? You must be finding things that weren't going to cause harm
They weren't
anyway.
going to cause harm. Man, that's a big deal. And do you think the same is going with melanoma, skin cancer?
Oh yeah, that's a great example. There's a nice paper by Aid Adamson, I think in JAMA Oncology. No, in New England Journal. It's a New England Journal paper. Also Gil Welch that looks at melanoma, the rising melanoma diagnoses, going through the roof, but death from melanoma is a flat line.
We can measure things that don't tell us anything useful. And it's sometimes better not to know. Now, it's even worse when you have government statistics agencies making these choices for us because their incentives get really weird. So in Canada, for example, and actually Vinay points to Canada sometimes glowingly in this regard, they decide whether or not some of these treatments will be covered by their national socialized healthcare system. And they're just deciding. And it turns out they are doing pretty brutal math about the cost of care. And someone has to do it, but I would rather it be us, we the people, not bureaucrats that want to have more control over our lives and maybe shorten our lives to line their pockets. That's sometimes what's going on. This is not the only example, though. There are other examples that are really important at the individual level and also great analogies for the problems with the BLS.
The point is that even the biggest optimist about mammographic screening would probably cite a 20% reduction in dying from breast cancer. They can't claim a reduction in dying for any reason. And that means 80% of breast cancer deaths are not avoided. And this is largely using studies that happened decades ago. And probably a lot of the changes in breast cancer treatment have eroded that benefit. I think that's what proponents would say. A critic like me would say is that I truly have no idea if I advise a woman to undergo this screening test, if she's going to live longer. I just don't know. And I don't know if she's going to live better. And I have to ask myself, what are we doing as a profession that we cannot answer that most basic question?
So Vinay here is talking about the fact that excessive mammograms have turned out to come under scrutiny because they induce women, our wives, our daughters, our mothers, to sometimes undergo really difficult, painful, and risky surgeries for outcomes that don't appear to help in the aggregate. They might have helped individually. This is the thing that makes this kind of statistics stuff hard. I have family members who have done some of the tests that are now recommended not to do. For example, as a man, routine PSA testing for prostate cancer. It is now generally understood that excessive and routine PSA testing has led to more people getting prostatectomies and other forms of cancer treatment that wouldn't have extended their life if they had avoided them. So you're basically making your life worse by intervening because you think there's a problem that really nothing can help. It is...
Something must be done. This is something, therefore we must do it.
But doing the wrong thing is worse than doing nothing.
Doing the wrong thing is worse than doing nothing. My dear friend Russ Roberts, this is Econ Talk, responds more forcefully, and I think it's worth hearing because it's wisdom.
So you say you just don't know. Isn't it a little stronger? Isn't it? As far as we know, there's no effect. It's not, we don't know if it works or not. We're saying with the evidence that we have, it doesn't work. It does not extend the lives of the average person. Again, there may be many categories of people who should screen, and it will be have a positive impact on longevity. But for the average person, there's no evidence that it works.
That's how I would put it. I'd say there's no, this is where the statisticians quibble about the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence sort of thing. But I would say that, look, there's a conventional burden in medicine, which is if you do something for 50 years, you got to prove it works, and you never proved it. You take all the trials, you put them together, there's no all-cause mortality benefit. Yes, maybe they're underpowered. Maybe you need to run 3 million person randomized studies. But until you do so, maybe you're the one who should cool your rhetoric. You don't have evidence that you live longer or live better from doing this. And I also think, more to point, that if you told someone doing this, what I'm saying right now, that actually, if you pull all the studies, there's no evidence women live longer, would they really want to do it?
The analogy here between medical intervention on our bodies, our complex system in our bodies, and government intervention in our society, the complex system of our society, is pretty much one-to-one. Analogies always have limitations, and there are some here too. But frankly, this is maybe the best analogy we've got. In medicine, there is a basic premise. It's the Hippocratic Oath. Do no harm. That the burden of proof on intervening is high because once you open the body with a knife, you are introducing harm. It is harmful to cut open the human body. It is harmful to modify the body through drugs that have side effects. All of these things have harm. So as doctors, and I come from a family of doctors, I am not a doctor myself, but the philosophy here I can talk about. Do no harm is the North Star. We should want a politics of do no harm. A politics that says, hold the phone, I don't know what I'm doing, and I'm going to cause a lot of trouble. And both sides of the political aisle do plenty of harm. They can do good, it's not impossible. But more often than not, they're doing harm. They're shifting, or they're doing harm for you so that this other person can benefit. The person that my voter benefits while your voter gets harmed. It is a zero-sum game. But very often, the harms are in the aggregate. We are all worse off for the harms that take place. And just like so many of these medical screenings that produce unnecessary and harmful interventions on our bodies, government statistics and the liars who make them induce very similar harms on our economy and our society as a whole. And so I think the critics of President Trump's maneuvers when it comes to the BLS have a point, but most of them wouldn't be willing to take that point seriously. They can't follow their criticism to the logical and historically reasonable conclusion, which is the government shouldn't do any of this stuff at all. But let me know what you think. Have I made a compelling case? Do you think that the BLS deserves more credit than I'm giving it? Let me know in the comments. And of course, head over to dadssavesamerica.com and become a subscriber. It's a great way to support what we're doing here. And of course, have a great weekend.